Здравствуйте, мои дорогие любители хорошего кинематографа, качественной еды и элитного алкоголя. Меня зовут silentium.vulpes и добро пожаловать на мой канал. Смотрите видео, оставляйте комментарии и подписывайтесь на сам канал для поддержки меня. Также вы можете поддержать меня финансово через Donationalist, DonatPay и платной подпиской на Boosty. Для уведомлений о прямых трансляциях и прочих активностей обязательно подпишитесь на телеграм-канал. Все ссылочки есть в описании. Спасибо и приятного просмотра.
Документалка по Half-Life, господа. Так, погнали. Я слышал про нее, но я не видел.
You just go over the mountains over here and you're in high desert. You get past Ellensburg and it's high desert. So I spent a lot of time out there getting reference. Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington. I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos and also a lot of just reference imagery of just like, hey, this is what desert looks like and big cliffs and stuff like that.
Цветовая гамма действительно такая, что есть.
That drive was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and I'm not even sure I spent the night. I did. I must have spent the night down there. So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out in the Columbia Gorge.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
25 лет назад. Я, кстати, по-моему, не проходил без читов. Или проходил. Не помню вообще, когда последний раз я первый Half-Life проходил. Это было давно. Точно не проходил ни Blue Shift, ни который второе там дополнение про этого спецназовца. Интересно. Про воспоминания. Каково это было тогда игры делать?
My name is Mike Harrington. I was co-founder at Valve. I wasn't really used to big companies. When I started at Microsoft, it wasn't that big. It was like 1,500 people, like a big high school. 9 years later, it was significantly bigger. I'm thinking, oh, this place is too big. And, that was still like 1996. So they had a long ways to go. I told my managers like a year before, like, I'm leaving. I'm leaving in a year and I'm going to start a game company. And the first person I talked to was a good friend of mine, Michael Abrash. But at that time, he was trying to do something within Microsoft. And by the time, it made sense, John Carmack had convinced him to go work at...
Мне кажется, вот вообще в тот период, если бы я мог в взрослом сознании в том период в чем-то таком участвовать, основная крутость вот этого всего процесса в том, что эти игры и вообще вот эта индустрия как будто бы такая еще свежая. То есть там нету каких-то паттернов, которые точно работают. Там еще куча всего не исследовано. И вот эта какая-то атмосфера, дух энтузиазма, она, мне кажется, вот тогда еще была, и это не было настолько закорпоратировано. То есть сейчас вполне себе весь там геймдизайн, подход к продукту, какие-то метрики продукта, они понятны. То есть в том числе это и Valve в этом виновата, потому что он сделал магазин, у магазина, который тоже есть для разработчиков какие-то четкие метрики, там предзаказы, заказы, активность и прочее, и ты, в общем-то, понимаешь, насколько твой продукт успешен и насколько у него будет дальше продаж. Там дальше другими коммерческими вещами добиваешься всего, и это как будто бы все вот это вот затею создания игр делает несколько скучной. А в то время, когда это только начиналось, когда еще не было цифровой дистрибьюции, кажется, что это такой какой-то рок-н-ролл.
So how could
что Ромеро может действительно тебя своей сучкой сделать.
You say no to that. And then I was having lunch with Gabe, and I said, Gabe, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave, and I'm going to start a game company. He goes, I want to leave. I want to start a game company. Like, all right, and that was it.
On the surface, we should have failed. Like, and realistically, both my...
Круто, что Valve — это частная компания, то есть она не торгуется на рынке, и, конечно, ей не надо там хорошую отчетность иметь, они могут делать то, что сами хотят, и, может быть, поэтому, собственно, у нас нету какого-нибудь Half-Life 3, который бы всех разочаровал, то есть они как бы как Apple, или нет, не Apple, это принцип был Blizzard когда-то, что это будет готово, когда это будет готово.
And I thought we would get about a year into it, realize we'd made horrible mistakes, and go back to our friends at Microsoft and ask for our jobs back. But we did think that we knew a fair bit about software development, that there were expertise that goes into it. I think we also had some pretty clear ideas of how to design a company, right? So when we were building Half-Life, we were also designing Valve at the same time.
We had no plan except for, by then, like I mentioned, Michael had gone to id, and he said, "Oh, you're starting a game company. You have to use our engine." So Gabe and I flew down to Mesquite to meet.
Эпизоды были странным решением.
id. We spent a good.
Да, в смысле дополнение Half-Life 2?
Deal time with John Romero, and he told us like, this is what you need to do to start a game company. You need to go out and hire some level designers and do that kind of thing. And we kind of understood the engineering part. And then because we were Michael's friends, we.
Opposing Force был неплохим. Я вот как раз ни Opposing Force, ни Blue Shift не проходил. Если говорить про эпизоды к второму Half-Life, не знаю. Мне кажется, эпизоды дополняют какой-то лор, и вот этот мир, он чуточку расширяется, выходя даже за границы города, как будто бы в большей степени. И мир становится более таинственным. Вообще сам лор, его стилизация, то, что происходит в Half-Life, это визуально не похоже ни на одну игру. Вот это круто. И сам такой вот умирающий мир, тлеющий мир, как будто бы это то, что мне нужно в играх. Я сейчас думаю, вот мне же Dark Souls, наверное, нравится тоже, это, что это по сути какие-то развалины. Это уже какая-то тухлая слава чего-то. И ты как бы видишь эти развалины, и тебе какое-то воображение. Ты идешь по этому городу и видишь, здесь когда-то жили люди, но вот теперь здесь полностью все захвачено, все превращение в колонию всей земли. Но они просто охренели от кранча над Half-Life 2 и не хотели опять 6 лет делать одну игру. Ну да, тоже верно. С другой стороны, вот я играл в Half-Life как Alyx, которая VR, мне понравилась. Как VR-опыт, это вообще лучшее, что я пробовал, а я много разного VR в своей жизни попробовал. Это было круто. Это было круто. Круто было и пострелять приятно, и все это как-то так потрогать, в этом пребывать. Правда, тяжеловато, потому что иногда даже меня подташнивало.
Walked away with the source code to Quake that day. We had no contract yet. We had kind of an idea of what it could be, and they just gave us.
Но это во многом повторение Half-Life 2, то есть какого-то опыта Half-Life 2. То есть, если вы хотите пережить Half-Life 2 еще раз, но в VR Alyx это хороший вариант.
CD, and we had kind of the crown jewels of it, and that, game on.
Там у них нормативы такие, что полчаса геймплея — это несколько месяцев разработки. Похоже на правду. В принципе, так нормально и подходить, наверное. Причем это же даже не расширяется. То есть понятно, что полчаса геймплея нельзя сделать быстрее, если ты просто больше сотрудников наймешь. Все равно они должны быть как-то целостные, их должна там одна хотя бы команда делать, чтобы у тебя целостность оставалась. Потому что вот это вот фрагментарность игровая, она мне не нравится. Например, Киберпанк, в нем очень много фрагментарности. То есть ты понимаешь, что как будто бы разные люди делали разные части, и это все неоднородно. Какая-то фрагментарность есть в Elden Ring, которая мне тоже не нравится. То есть ты понимаешь, что сделано хорошо, а что не детализировано.
I think most of us had no game development experience. We were either amateur.
Мне кажется, в принципе, тогда в 90-е еще ни у кого такого опыта не было, как такового. Он, наверное, не был как-то еще осмыслен. То есть даже его где-то получить было, наверное, невозможно. Это сейчас, понятно, есть куча там выставок разработчиков, там все делят своим опытом и с точки зрения метрик, и с точки зрения ощущения от игры, каких своих находок, но в то время, мне кажется, это совсем страшная хрень. Это было похоже на какое-то подводного краба или что-то в этом роде, паука. Не набирали модеров. Так, сейчас, одну минуту, мне что нос опять заложило, пойду прысну. Так. Так, первый Half-Life, получается, был сделан на том же движке, что и Quake 3. Ой, Quake 1. Не на своем, не на сорсе.
At night for fun, or some people were from the software world, but they had never worked on a game. I think we had 3 or 4 people in the entire company who had actually shipped a game when we started Half-Life. We have to figure out what is Valve's first game. So we have to come up with an IP. So everything is done from scratch.
Gabe came into the office and he said, I read this story. I read this Stephen King story called The Mist. You know, Stephen King, it's got monsters, you know, people in a grocery store, fog comes in.
Если не смотрел «Туман»,
and monsters in the fog, you know, use your imagination. We didn't want to write that as a game. That wasn't really the point, but it was just the tension and, you know, how it felt.
Well, it was interesting at first we had...
Поморянин, здравствуйте. Там много было добавлено. Скелетная анимация вообще впервые в играх. Цветное освещение. Ну, понятно, что доработали.
2 games. Greg was working Prospero, and then Half-Life was originally called Quiver.
My job was then build a team and figure out another game for us to build. That'll be the second game Valve ships. What features should it have? How is it going to be different from a normal first-person?
Да, видео заказано полностью, мы его смотрим до конца. Есть отличная страшилка на движке первого Half-Life Cry of Fear, что-то даже знакомое. Сейчас хочу нагуглить Cry of Fear. Как будто бы любому видео какое-то смотрели. Либо где-то с ней сталкивался, но нет.
Every time the engine got a feature for Prospero, Half-Life stole it, and then Half-Life just started getting visually, you know, more impressive. And...
Survival horror. Я хочу сейчас... Времени побольше должно быть. Хочу пройти все резики. Второй, ну, переизданный, 2, 3, и потом 4 перепройти.
And cooler, and eventually it just, yeah, because it was going to ship sooner, it just stole the resources from Prospero, and Prospero just faded away.
I had this character had like a floating orb, and it wanted to have some, you know, effects on it. It's kind of magical energy, something, and so.
Ну да, какие-то, смотрите, следы дизайна, они прослеживаются. Здесь какая-то смесь вот в этой вот эскизе и монстров из второго Half-Life, там такие женщины в белом были убийцы, и вот этой женщины из, как она называется-то, Портала.
I worked with them on that and came up with the first version of the beam effects, and you know, they were using it, they were happy with it, and then people on Half-Life are coming over and like, what is that? How did you do that? So very quickly that got into Half-Life. The disaster sequence has kind of beam effects all over it, and we ended up using it for the Vortigons.
Like there are a bunch of things.
Да, мне кажется, с точки зрения движка, это тоже увлекательно для именно разработчиков, вот эти все задачи решать, какие-то вот такие штуки писать. Еще нигде не было. Сейчас как будто бы это все ощущается скучнее. Есть какой-то готовый движок, там уже много чего сделано, ты ничем таким не занимаешься. Прям, ну, по сути, только творчеством. Ну, как будто бы без математики. Без математики не такое честное творчество. Если нравится survival horror, то вам может понравиться. Я играл в Darkwood немножко. Играл. Вот. На стриме даже. Да, интересно, он есть под Switch? Хотя он есть под Mac вроде бы. В общем, может попробовать в него поиграть самостоятельно.
We're doing that we thought would help us tackle the problem of what video games were. And what video games were.
Да, мне тоже кажется, что вот он может задушить.
A rapidly changing field where at the time 90% of video games failed to turn a profit. And a few percentage of them were very, very profitable.
Из survival хорроров, которые вот на стриме играли, который был заказан, мне понравился Fear and Hunger. Вообще какой-то своей идеи, но, видимо, потому что он такой слишком дарксольный, какой-то dark fantasy, мне зашло в большей степени. Но я в него таки не играл потом самостоятельно.
Right, so it was a field that really valued talent.
like I said, Gabe and I brought some people, and then, from there on out, we had to hire people. And, Romero said you got to hire level designers. So, we found some people who had industry experience.
Worked on Rise of the Triad first as a pixel artist, and then went with Duke Nukem, and then everything just went nuts.
Duke Nukem.
But I was sitting in my office one day, and my phone rang, just out of the blue, and I pick it up, and it's this recruiter. Eventually, he hooked me up with Gabe, and they flew me up here. It's a big surprise.
Duke Nukem тоже очень кайфовый был. Всегда мне заходил, я его, проходил, понятно, и раньше, и потом еще он вышел на айфоны. Давно это было еще, на старые айфоны, вот, без этих самых, без сканера отпечатка пальцев, которые еще были, вот, и это было круто даже на айфоне его пройти.
But then we started looking, the nice thing that we had is we had a whole bunch of people in the world who had been working on mods, and so we could start looking at those folks. And that's where we hired a lot of our designers.
Steve and Guthrie, Steve Bond, John Guthrie were my favorite hires by far. Other than Doug, Gabe sent them an email and they're like, who is this scammer? Never heard of these guys. Just kids, like barely 20, I swear. And they show up and they're just the most creative, brilliant.
Clever.
Fucking clever. Steve had the magic ability to make stuff fun.
The fact that those guys have been hired.
Как у Ромеро, секрет делать гениальные игры, делайте ваши игры забавными. То есть самое главное, что тебе было всегда весело. Ты весело просто бегаешь с ломиком, можешь все долбить, и любой там стену долбить ящик.
To go work on some game for some company, I think that was the start for a lot of people that something cool was going to happen because those guys were already doing stuff that was cool.
And then Mark showed up, and Mark actually knows how stories work, beginning, middle, end, and all this stuff, and he had all sorts of great ideas, and he also would just bring good ideas out of everybody else as well.
Like the person who wrote more code on Half-Life was a chemistry major who decided to be an IP lawyer in Atlanta.
Нормально человека закинул.
Right? And he ended up writing more code than anybody else. The creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House. It's not like there are a bunch of people that you could say, oh, this person, has a PhD in video game design. It was that combination of both finding those people when it wasn't necessarily easy.
Это, кстати, талант получается его. Вот именно отыскать, увидеть эти таланты, вот этих людей, их способности, их возможности, и понять, что в общий пазл команды они встраиваются, чтобы это все сработало. Это, конечно, тот еще ад. Это, знаете, как куча предметов падает, все рушится, и вы пытаетесь все это удержать, вот это вот хрупкое равновесие.
Find them at that stage in the video game industry, and then also convincing them that it was a better place to work than anybody else.
Я, к сожалению, не играл в Dishonored, это что-то я уже сожалею, что этого не делал. We can establish a strong foundation for the game well. Modify it, great. Reactivity. Это этот самый и.
One of the things that I definitely learned was how to hire engineers. And, we needed some engineers.
For us, anyway, we had licensed ID's engine. We're using the Quake engine. And one of the things me and some of the other engineers, probably Ken, were talking about was if it would be possible to use the save system to kind of like join our levels together in a really seamless way. So you get to the end of a level, save stuff, and then load some of it on the next level. And have it just feel like, the world's all connected.
And so we had like everyone.
Это приятное такое ощущение тоже от игры, что такая поточная, что ты вроде бы понимаешь, как все это связано.
Once in a while,
Ну и это есть в Quake втором, например, там были вот эти возвращения, когда перировал, не прошел его так, но не перепрошел. проходил, конечно, его, но это ощущение, что можно возвращаться, какие-то уровни ответвления, которые вообще не важны для сюжета.
Or the train would get to a point and you would have a little stop for the level to transition. And so he wrote that code leveraged on top of just the save load code to do the transitions. And I think in Half-Life 1 we got most of the transitions were, you know, a second or two.
I remember when we went from 8-bit to 16-bit, like, hey, we don't have to have all our textures fit in a certain, 256 colors. That was a huge...
Вот это вот блендинг цветов, причем они корректно сбалансируются с точки зрения цветового круга.
Huge liberation.
The two tech investments we made for Half-Life was to get to 16-bit color and skeletal animation for all the monsters.
But at the time, it was completely revolutionary. Your Quake characters were... It's like a text file of vertex positions over time.
I wanted so much more.
Блин, это вообще невообразимо. То есть, когда у вас есть скелетная анимация, соответственно, вы можете там, понимаешь, что это гуманоид, да, у него внутри скелет примерно одинаковый, и можно вот какую-то анимацию одну сделать и ее как бы в разным гуманоидным персонажам подставлять. А получается, в Quake было просто массив данных с изменением всех этих точек, их позиции для того, чтобы записать анимации без какой-то логики. То есть, когда у вас есть скелетная анимация, да, вы еще там можете добавлять массы, да, то есть там по-разному, это уже в более современных играх и движках, и 3D-программах, то есть там есть какие-то мускулы, какая-то масса, там в большей мере искажение тела, костюма и происходит в меньшей мере. Еще типа понимание, что там на персонаже одет там пиджак, да, то есть он как-то вращается. Там его низ его он будет типа больше колебаться, здесь он не будет колебаться. Как, например, если взять мультфильм, то у пиксаровского в душе, там вот активно они работали с анимацией одежды. Если даже поиграть какой-нибудь Геншин, там тоже эта одежда вращается, да, даже Dark Souls, там есть элементы, которые как-то физику передаются. И это все, конечно, сильно ускоряет и облегчает. И насколько это было жестко и сложно делать в самом начале, это безумие. Так обычно всегда и есть. То есть кто-то приходит, первопроходцы, и потом другие люди все больше инструментария разрабатывают, и становится больше творчества. Но опять же, наличие прям инструментария на все случаи жизни и там 2-3 движков приводит к тому, что игры, может быть, слишком одинаково выглядят, слишком одинаково сделаны.
Animation, and I wanted the animators to have the freedom to put in 100, 200, 500 frame of animation, if not more. And then you can do all sorts of other things because you have a skeleton, so it's like, oh, I can hook on a gun to a character. I can start to make changes of characters and replay the same animation or
Еще было делали персонажей из нескольких кусков, которые отдельно крутились.
Use most of the same model, so we can swap out heads, we can swap out this, we can swap out whatever.
Like all the technology that went into the game to make it as fun as it is.
Не стал, когда тренировал в GTA 3.
Was not available one generation before. So licensing the Quake engine, which was, very mature and had level designers who'd grown up just goofing around with it.
I wasn't heavily into scripting since back into Doom. Like my old Doom levels have a lot of weird, odd events in them. I think I asked Ken, is it possible that I could, have access to the character's animation, like a trigger? Like what I mentioned, I could make the guys go into an animation, I could make them run, and then I would configure everything. It was all hack. This is
Короче, больше инструментов для рассказывания истории, что тоже важно. Потому что кажется, что Half-Life, может быть, один из первых шутеров, где история действительно важна. И как бы есть вот небольшое это погружение. Для меня находка в геймдизайне стала серия Thief. Я не играл в первые два, вот только Deadly Shadow играл, еще нигде, и который 4-й. Не видел в играх сеттинг технологического продвинутого высокого средневековья. Классная идея. Мне, знаете, что еще дошло? Что, по-моему, и в 4-м, и в 3-м там нету какого-то такого врага, который какое-то мега-зло. В 3-м вы побеждаете ведьму, довольно-таки жуткую, криповую. Это так интересно сделано.
Total hacky stuff. And that
да, такой сеттинг немного Warhammer-подобный.
Is mostly what I built. It was like things like characters reacting and jumping out are made to look like, or I'd use a push brush to throw a head crab out to make it look like it launched at something.
Or if a loud sound happened,
they would respond,
would cower.
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen like every 3 to 5 seconds. The player stands still, the
Didn't have to be much.
universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play back something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just an interesting sign or
a sound or some vignette or something. So I came up with this interaction.
Ну круто, это тоже вот получается, если это все ассоциировать даже с кинематографом, какие-то вообще первые попытки вот этот язык, как язык взаимодействия со зрителем, как зритель там воспринимает картинку, тот же самый пресловутый эффект Кулешова, здесь тоже вот какое-то такое вот ощущение, как игрок воспринимает игру, как он может не существовать, как он может в нее поверить, что для этого нужно.
Method where you could do little AIs where the characters would talk and interact with you a little bit. And then we wanted to do spectacle, and that was scripted sequences where you could tell a character, you need to run here and then jump into this animation, and then have...
Очень странно сделана тень, как будто бы тень это... ну, видимо, это не проекция, это, видимо, просто еще один персонаж, как будто бы, ну, то есть то же самое взяли и наклонили, чуть расплющили, без какой-либо работы с освещениями. Ну, логичное решение для тени.
A bunch of you all synchronize your animation because it's somebody flying through the air, they're smashing something, or they're doing something.
А таких тварей же, по-моему, нету в игре.
Yeah, and then test it and figure out, like, oh, this is real easy to break. That was the roughest thing about scripted sequences, where you'd have like a head crab jumping on a scientist or something, and it's like, yeah, it works totally fine 90% of the time, but some people just sprint right at the scientist, and sometimes we have to put them behind glass. And
sometimes getting the level designers making the player want to do the...
Все эти руины под землей, жирные отсылки к мифическим орденам старых игр, еще подается все через цикличность мира. Всегда отстраивать. Ну, вообще, эта идея в воре с гигантским городом, она крутая.
Thing that gives them the most fun is this very subtle art.
The tentacle sequence is probably the one I remember the most.
You're playing it, right? That was the first time I think they melded together.
Because you had your trigger
so closely,
and we wanted it to be triggered. So by the time you start to see it, you see the scientist flying through the air and hitting the wall. Then you could look in and you could see the scientist being carried away. The tentacle itself is separate; it's on its own, and you bring the two together, mesh them together, and boom.
It felt so seamless, though, and that for me was like moments like that, and that might have been the first one, is when you start to see the script.
Кстати, классный босс с этими тентаклями. Там же еще там немного боссов, но они запоминаются, вот эти тентакли, как бы как мини-босс. Они как-то не отмечены, что это боссы. Так не означают, это какая-то мать хэдкрабов и главный вот этот вот чувак. По-моему, больше боссов и нету.
That events and play start to blend a little bit more than just ambience.
Вот в что не играл тоже.
I remember Brett in particular had done some of the lab scenes where scientists would walk from one area to another and just look at a monitor. And it gave them a little bit of life. A ton of the work that went into that area was because we knew it was going to be the beginning of the game, and we really needed to make it a vibrant and interesting, fun place to be and explore.
Ну, кстати, когда я был совсем мелким, мне, конечно, это вступление казалось долговатым. Таким долгим, и хотелось побыстрее уже что-нибудь начать делать. Там еще, ну, понятно, что до английского нормально не знал, немного непонятно, что вообще происходит, не очень увлекательно.
Originally they were designed to sort of be behind glass. They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm going to put that right in front of you. And I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this work? It's not supposed to do it.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
The run speed for the player was so insane.
Yeah.
It was like, what, 25 miles an hour or something?
It was sprinting. It was...
Ой, я не знаю, сколько времени играл. У меня не было компьютера, я ходил к товарищам разным. Ну, у меня был основной друг. В то время, когда был компьютер, я играл у них. Сколько времени я там тратил, честно говоря, не скажу.
You could get so far, so fast. And so you'd either have to make the scripted sequence like so quick that
you could barely see what's happening. Most people weren't looking in the right place anyways. You know, you'd have to like get their attention with like a particle or a sound or lighting or something. And then you wanted them to see what was happening. But when we play tested, and if like a scientist was like being pulled into a vent or something, like people wouldn't just stop and like, oh.
Конечно, вообще и зомби здесь гениальные, как они сделаны. Вот эти хэдкрабы мне в свое время очень понравилось. Типа вообще воображать, что есть такие вот типа существа, они прыгают на голову и превращают человека в зомби. Вроде бы как бы уже какие-то необычные зомби. Уже как-то на них по-другому смотрел. И вот это все воображение вообще, как это происходит. Ты вот ощущаешь, что тебя что голову захватывает, потом твое тело начинает как-то мутировать, превращаться.
They would. Oh wow, look at that. They just run straight ahead and just start shooting.
It's hard when you think back to it to recognize that those kind of interactive moments were so new. Like people just hadn't seen them.
It was worth it because no other games were doing that. No other games had that interactivity. No other games had that spectacle playing out in front of you. And it just added that whole feel of Half-Life. Gabe had...
Я впервые в Half-Life поиграл в 2002 году, даже с устаревшей графикой. Интро впечатляло. Ну, я даже не знаю, когда я первый раз попробовал Half-Life. Может быть, лет в 9. В 10. Нет, она еще не вышла. На релизе в него, что ли, играл? Нет, на 96-м. Так. Она вышла в 98-м. Не мог я в 9 лет. Значит, на лет 12. Так и получается, да, 2002.
Interactivity, and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist.
Или она так рано попала, может быть, реально в 90-х.
The world is acknowledging all of your actions, and that's a huge part of reinforcement.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? In behavioral science, you would say we were explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall...
Ну, это круто, что, да, чем она забавна, это куча разных ситуаций. Вот сейчас даже отрезки какие-то вижу, они... требует от тебя реагирования. Вот там был момент с взрывом, когда тебе надо выпрыгнуть, догадаться среагировать на это. Сейчас турель выключить. Вроде бы сейчас нам с нашего уже опыта кажется, что это все такое заезженное, но это реально было в первый раз, и ты не просто там убивал все, что движется.
Shoot it. To me, it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it is to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices. Yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Ну, кстати, насчет ИИ, мне кажется, вот в втором Half-Life он достаточно примитивный был. Я помню эти комбайны, которые просто там бегут, так ничего особо и не делали. Там был уже разбор его. Ну, это круто, да. Это то, что он понимает, что игроку хочется, что ощущение, что ты на что-то влияешь, что даже стены можно
трогать.
Ted and I, we were on the same page in terms of what the game should look like, which would be just...
То есть это, получается, у тебя вот эта монтировка, да, это что-то подобное, как у слепого человека тросточкой. Ты ей можешь вот это все пространство, по сути, прощупать. И этот вот ощущение от этого пространства делает эти стены, что это не просто какие-то нарисованные квадраты, кубы, а вот то, что они реальные, что они там не пробиваются, что они, что как бы ты в этом пространстве существуешь. Интересно.
Sort of alien in a very naturalistic kind of way. Like these are creatures from another dimension, another planet that look like they evolved in a way. And Chuck had he came from Duke Nukem. He made a bunch of monsters that went in a sort of a different direction. And for a while.
Кстати, да, вот это похоже на что-то Дюка Нюковское. Первая часть сильно напугала тварь в воде у дамбы.
While the game had a hard time coalescing around a single.
А как будто бы вообще стилистика Дюка Нюкема, может быть, вдохновлялась каким-нибудь XCOM-ом. Такие типичные пришельцы. Ну, круто, что это уже они смогли вот этот стиль как-то найти свой необычный.
All the ones that looked like genitals were Ted's. And all the ones with shiny bits that looked like alien soldiers were Chuck's.
That was a thing when I first came in, Ted's style and mine.
And trying to figure that out.
Trying to find the harmony between the two to make it work.
Yeah.
Ted he really liked the Wayne Barlow aesthetic, and I had a little bit different, but it worked. Ted made these really weird. He did the head crab, you know, that's pretty much the symbol of it all.
Ну да, хед-крабы, кстати, похожи на каких-то реальных крабов. Я где-то фотку не видел. Тут японские крабы какие-то наловленные, их там много-много. Вот они прям выглядят очень похожи.
And I remember taking his head crab and putting it on a scientist and making the zombie. Right. Well, we pretty much we talked, and it's like, okay, you do that, and Ted did the soldiers, I did the scientists, I did a lot of the aliens, and with the Hornet gun, I did the Hornet gun for that one as well too. You know, the alien slave. Well, I did some animations for the bull squid or bull chicken. I have to call him that, but that's a Ted creature there. The hound eye was Ted's as well.
Yeah, a lot of the fleshy. If it's got a lot of flesh on it, maybe too much.
Yeah, that's a Tedism.
You can always tell Ted's designs because they're much more aquarium than aquarium and/or like unspeakables.
Вот это и круто, вот это и классно. Что они, кстати, это сохранили. Я сейчас смотрю на все эти зарисовки, в общем-то, чем-то похоже. Я раньше вот этой схожести не так сильно отмечал со второй Half-Life'ом. Вот эти такие, как бы сказать, такие кожаные панцири какие-то. А там ведь, по сути, и эти стрекозы, не стрекозы, но, короче, это вертолеты, которые летают, они похожи, и шагающие твари тоже похожи.
Oh, Big Mama, I forgot about Big Mama. Oh, God.
It's a testicle, right? It's like,
so disturbed.
I concepted a guy in sort of a NASA spacesuit, a scientist guy. He was actually modeled after a couple of programmers I know. Big, beefy, bearded Linux programmers, And so that's where the HEV suit sort of emerged out of. There was a lot of
идеальное попадание в аудиторию.
Desire for not having a space marine or a soldier be the guy. And then Chuck Jones went off and did a pretty different version of him that became known as Ivan the Space Biker.
Oh, God. I remember telling myself, it's like anytime you make a screenshot, make sure it's good, because you don't know where this is going to appear again.
We didn't know that.
And Ivan is the prime example of that one. Sure, so, you're looking at, well, go look at Quake. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that, and he's got this incredibly boxy head. And you're always hearing, don't put too many polys in it. And it's like, okay, so Ivan got the square head, and it was kind of an early, just a rough prototype of a Gordon Freeman baby. And I remember we didn't know what Gordon looked like. So it's like I was looking for somebody, and I found Mike Harrington. It's like, Mike, what does Gordon look like? I don't know. Put yourself in there. It's like, oh, okay. And so I went in and put kind of my likeness on the early Gordon model in the game. and it kind of stayed
Did
there.
you have a ponytail?
Well, I was ex-tattoo artist, so yeah, I definitely had that. I don't have anything to work with now, but yeah, that point I had a ponytail on.
If you play the game, you know that it's Chuck. If you play multiplayer and you see the model, it's clear.
But yeah, if you look on the back of that, there's this little four triangles, and he's got a little ponytail back there. I did the G-Man, and again, that one was Gabe was talking about the cigarette man from X-Files. So we needed our own
Первое, что напрашивается, глядя на Джимана.
equivalent of that.
Because after a while, after playing with the game...
Да, еще вот этот Джиман тоже такой элемент таинственности. Хорошо, они штрихи такие добавили и ничего не объясняют. Главное, ничего не объясняют.
For a long time, people realized, like, hey, we made this character, and just in this one office scene in the beginning, you know, where he's behind the window and he's talking to a scientist or something, and he's like, he looks really creepy. It was late in the day that we thought, oh, okay, well, he's going to be the big bad behind all of this. Like, scatter him around in places that you can't get to him, but he's there mysteriously.
There wasn't enough in the beginning of the game. It's like, we need another monster. Head crabs weren't enough. It got kind of repetitious. I think I grabbed Ted and said, I need them to do this and this. And so he whipped it out in not much time at all. I'm gonna get the timing just right. And I have no time to do this, so I'm just gonna bang it out. And then once it was working...
Ну, кстати, здесь что очень смотрю на них, круто, что они такие какие-то вообще абсолютно обесчеловеченные. Они больше похожи на насекомых, чем на людей. Все-таки, например, в том же Duke Nukem монстры, они довольно человекоподобные, там, с глазами, с такой какой-то мускулатурой. Вот эти вот, не знаю, как они называются, первые враги, но реально похожи. А здесь они прям какие-то твари.
Everybody said, oh, let's go back and sprinkle them back in the map.
Пчелы.
And that was
this. We introduced them a little earlier than we were planning them.
Yeah, because they weren't real tough. They weren't supposed to be tough.
But they were ranged.
But they were ranged, and they were fun, and they had a big show, and like that was showing off a bunch of stuff.
I remember the assassin came in pretty late.
That was it. It was like, okay, I have a week and a half. It was already done. It was already all modeled, already all animated. And the requirement was it couldn't have any new animations and any new anything. So had to come up, I grabbed a bunch of Steve Bond's AI and banged that thing out. I built a level super crude, but it had all the right spacing and all the right heights and all the right, geometry.
Again, it's just a presentation where this creature gets to shine, this enemy gets to shine, and is your entire focus for that scene, and it's kind of a memorable experience.
Вот это вот не помню в игре.
It just takes place in a different fashion than other encounters, and you get knocked out, and there's all kinds of the lights go out, and you get dragged through a corridor. And
Противники были самыми противными врагами. Ну, я тут помню.
Again, it's something you remember in the game.
У ассасинов есть специальные кости для трясущих сисек. Видите, все уже тогда было ясно. Что надо делать, что важно, а что нет. Я вообще вот это ассасинов не помню. У меня воспоминания о сражении с ними не сохранилось. Собачки классные.
We just did a lot of playtesting and did a lot of level building and used all of the monsters and used everything that we had developed and started seeing which ones kind of stuck out a little oddly. Like we had the hound eyes that Ted had concepted and Kelly had done great sounds for them, and so they seemed like a very oddly plausible sort of alien creature. And Chuck did what we called the panther eye, which was this big black panther looking creature that also just had a big red eye for his face and a big shark fin coming out the back. And design wise, he seemed like this is a very useful creature. It's like when you design things, you like to have a gradient of difficulty, a gradient of escalation and threat. And so if we had these hound eyes, then yes, this panther, bigger, scarier looking thing
Вот этих же не было вообще.
Would be more of a threat. It was in the game for a long time and then sort of just worked its way out because folks couldn't find a way to incorporate a creature like that into the environment and make it seem reasonable.
The Stuka bat was, it was something that I had did, just a weird, another creature from the air. We had the chub toad that we were going to use as a feeding animal to help, and yeah, they had a mechanic to where they were going to use this to distract monsters so you could possibly get by. And it pretty much reached, you know, fruition to where we created the object, but then again, time became the factor and it had to get cut.
I grew up just outside DC, and so there's all these like big, really banal office buildings, and that's kind of the direction I went. So it started becoming a facility. And so I started making these kind of linoleum tiles and the drop ceiling, the concrete block wall, the black and white tile floor.
She was like the texture artist for for most of the game. Yeah, right. It's just an overwhelming amount of work.
Originally, I was hand painting all of the textures, and you can really see a shift in some of them where they go from hand painted to photo reference. The photo references are much better. So I was all over Seattle, Harbor Island, Gasworks Park, getting rusty metal things. What can I get good pictures of that is vaguely industrial and interesting to look at? And then how can we use this? And so, you know, sides of boxcars, and I don't know how many hallways in Half-Life are.
Ну, кстати, может быть, это тоже такой вот элемент. Они взяли и примешали сюда что-то, что можно встретить в реальной жизни, что, ну, глазу кажется таким, ну, подобным реальности. Это тоже добавляет такое твое погружение. Ты веришь в эту историю.
The Kirkland Costco. A lot of time in the Kirkland Costco, getting just packages of, I don't know why I needed snacks or something.
The first year was all about opportunity, and it you know, it wasn't quite as focused. We were finding our footing.
We were getting into the 3 months before supposedly shipping in '97, and it's like, this isn't gelling. This is really not good. This is like, you know, quick knockoff, cash grab, stupid, and let's not do that. There was a lot of disconnect between what all of the different groups were doing.
По такому же принципу в Dead Space на Ишмуре торговые автоматы и огнетушители размещены для контраста.
Engineering was doing, and what level design was doing, and what animation was doing. We had a bunch of monsters that had no plans to get in the game because nobody else was assigned to work on them, and we had a bunch of levels that, like, what's supposed to go in here? Oh, I don't know. Everybody's going to do a bunch of stuff, and like, no, that doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So here we were, all these people doing all these cool things, and just everything's just this random collection of, oh, here's a cool moment and a cool this, and you know, and then it's gone, and you know, oh, now on to the next thing. Because the way we were building the game was, every level designer was kind of his own silo, his own universe, and I think that just grew out of our, you know, kind of mod developer roots. But it wasn't cohesive, and it certainly didn't have a strategy for like maximizing any of that stuff.
You must have been in the meeting when we
Короче, так немного не работает.
Reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room,
right?
And Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor, and we played for 2 days. He played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment he turned around. He was like this with his hair. He's going, "We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail." And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't good."
You know, we were doing our best trying to make this game and the story, and you know, we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them, like, we're not going to ship this, and we realized that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right?
Не всегда работает. Иногда лучше сделать на 4, но в срок, и это куда важнее, чем... Короче, не всегда можно этому принципу следовать.
Try to force this thing out the door, But that's not the company we want to be. That's not the people we want to be. That's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
And so Kelly and I kind of sat down and sort of tried to take an inventory of all the cool stuff we had built and why weren't we just, building more on top of that. And those discussions kind of led to us building this kind of design cabal process to try to give some cohesion to the game and kind of changing the way we were approaching it.
And so a cabal was a small group of people, multidisciplinary group. There's like an artists, level designers, engineers, and everything in that. And a small team that would write up a spec for a level. There was the arc that Mark had written, so we knew how that fit into the story.
And we got a small group of people together, and we started with the beginning, and we went through literally what map do we need to build to tell us the story we're going to have to tell, and then what does that connect to, and what's the next piece and the next piece.
The strongest
просто все заново.
And most
Пофигу, начинаем сначала.
Influential thing that came out of them was, to me, the sketches, and they were really the visual meeting notes, right?
We came up with the four.
Они пошли, конечно, по сложному пути, но, наверное, другой путь не был возможен. То есть опробовать кучу всего и выбрать лучшее. Ну, конечно, колоссальный ресурс.
Formula for how that worked. We had a certain percentage of the time where you were fighting, a certain percentage of the time where you're exploring, a certain percentage of the time where you're solving puzzles. And so we could apply that uniformly through the game, and that worked pretty well.
Testing. Everything seems to be in order.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
The whole opening of the game was specifically a reaction to how all the other first-person shooters were, whether they had cutscenes or not. Like sometimes, they would just open without a cutscene, but you're standing in a room with a gun and there's a thing attacking you. So we could look at examples of all that, and I think there was expectation that that's what Half-Life had to do because every other game was doing it.
I can tell you the number of people who started up the game, were staring at it, and then accidentally bumped their mouse and realized this is live.
Yeah.
And as simple as that sounds, it was mind-blowing for so many people because there was too much going on, isn't it?
Да, это было необычно. И я сейчас думаю, какие у меня были эти ощущения, когда вот эта сцена запускалась. Наверное, ощущение, что что-то не работает. Почему у меня нет оружия? Что не так? Здесь какая-то ошибка.
This isn't real time. This is a recording,
That was sort of the way we, stumbled through a lot of the new narrative tricks. Was like, well, what can we do that you could do this in a movie or a story, but nobody's doing this in first-person shooters.
You're this anonymous scientist, and you're writing on this.
И, по-моему, ты еще вот в этих всех местах, которые ты видишь, когда приезжаешь, побываешь.
Train into work and rolled the credits at the beginning. It was kind of like a cinematic experience almost. Like I don't think games had really gone down that road. It's so funny to look at it now because it's so primitive, but at the time it felt like you were really in this Black Mesa world.
Pre-disaster survived from the first year, so a lot of that geometry was from that first version of the game, but in a very minimal way, right? Just the basic style of some of the hallways, the curved corners in the hallways, things like that. They more became sort of like Lego pieces that John could use and stitch together and extrude. And I know Brett did a lot of the raw geometry from pre-disaster, and then John did most of the work to ship it, and then the post and the train ride was all John, I think.
The Sector C, so those are heavily influenced by NASA control rooms with my favorite green hammerite, really influenced a lot of like the starting. We started with the kind of the consoles. I'm trying to remember, and then there was just lots of hallways and people were getting lost, and I did the color stripes to help people follow them places.
One of the things that was actually super exciting was how quotidian a lot of it really was. You know, the lunchroom with the microwave, you press the button and it would go splat.
My God, what are you doing?
Yeah, all this work so you can start a microwave.
Да, и при этом еще есть реакция у игры на твои события, что ты что-то сломал. Ты чувствуешь себя нашкодившим котиком либо ребенком.
Which was a reference to real life. Because that happened regularly. Like, we regularly accidentally blew up.
Blade Roll mostly, wasn't it?
Финну до сих пор нравится задумка игры с локальным апокалипсисом в научном комплексе. В этом больше жутковато, чем в интервенции инопланетян. Не знаю, мне кажется, и то, и другое достаточно интересно. Это, по сути, это же и есть начало этой интервенции.
People who were just, challenged with kitchen appliances. And, at one point we had a company fire. we had a lot of things going on in that kitchen.
All of that stuff had a real kind of eloquence that in the late 90s, in a world where everything was so over the top, but we still got to go on flights of fancy.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV.
I think like a super pivotal moment for me was when we came in this one morning and we saw the test chamber sequence that Kelly and John Guthrie and Wedge was in that office, and Dario Driller, they were all in this corner dark office where so much cool stuff happened. But so Kelly and John stayed up all night and did the test chamber sequence, and it's pretty much like the one we shipped.
I mean, that was a lot of what went on in that room that we called the submarine. It was just improvisation, just what can we do to solve this problem? How do we connect what's happening before to what's happening after? This needs to be somehow important, but we just don't know what to do. John and I talked about it. I went home that night and I sort of sketched out maybe we could do something cinematic. We'll take the camera away, we'll turn the lights off, we'll do sounds, we'll just throw everything we can at it. We built that basically.
Это прям, видимо, да, такая важная сцена. Она, мне кажется, гениально решена, то, что тебя телепортируют по местам разным, такая тоже заявка. Вообще, по сути, вся эта секвенция с проездом и телепортацией как будто бы такая заявка мира. Даже ты не подозреваешь, что в итоге ты в другом мире окажешься. Кажется, что игра закончится раньше, но нет, тебя в итоге по всему, так сказать, прокатывают.
Yeah, it's like the heartbeat and the breathing, all that stuff was in there. And I played through it and it was like, damn, I have not seen this in any medium, in anything before, experienced something like this, where this immersive experience of this actually happening like this. And at that point, it's like, okay, I see what it is we're doing. And it's this kind of...
кстати, и в целом, вот я не знаю, согласитесь вы или нет, вот эта последняя часть, когда мы на инопланетной, на другой планете оказываемся, в другом мире, она не яркая, несмотря на то, что вроде бы там есть куда фантазии разыграться, но сам научный комплекс по себе намного интереснее и в точке зрения пребывания, изучения его, чем вот эта другая планета.
Unbroken experience that happens to you, the player, and then that was this key principle about how,
И да, вот это еще ощущение, что по сути, как игра завязана, что ты как бы что-то испортил. Да, как с этим супом, точно. Ты же по сути же весь этот эксперимент делаешь, ты этот комплекс ломаешь. И типа ты нагадил, и надо убирать за собой.
We never take you out of that role.
Personally,
Platforming.
The difference between before the disaster sequence and after the disaster sequence, I felt we really had.
Я помню, мне было проблематично, то есть платформа меня, скорее всего, выбешивал.
I had an understanding that this product was going to be special, or it was going to be possible, it was going to be tied together, whereas before that, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of little things all disconnected, but you guys managed to tie two very different parts of the game together really well, and I thought, oh, okay, now I feel like we're on a track for
не сами придумали, что сцена самая слабая часть.
To me, it shifted my brain to have a lot of confidence that this product's coming together rather than just...
А просто сейчас по мере рассказа еще пытаюсь свои ощущения воспроизвести, как игра устроена, как она работает.
Generating a lot of content that exists independently of other content.
Я понимаю, что Ксен у меня ассоциируется только вот с этим вот маткой, так сказать, хедкрабов, каким-то нелепым, непонятным прыганием по платформам, непонятно, что тебя хотят, что ты хочешь, и потом просто битва с боссом.
We were funding our development was we sold a preview copy of Half-Life to a video card company, I forget which one. And so they had in their contract that we had to deliver it to them by a certain date. And we got like the first 3 levels done for them. It was really a good milestone for us, just, you know, from working as a company, because, hey, there was a deliverable. We got it done. And, you know, we shipped it off to them. And then I swear the next day it leaked. And I was just livid at first, which was stupid. But I was just like, I can't believe you guys let this get out. Like, you know, this wasn't us, you know. And then it turned into something amazing where people started playing it. And it was all over, and we started, you know, seeing it, you know, online, what people were thinking about it. And I forget which magazine who said, usually we don't review, you know, beta software, but they reviewed it and said, this is awesome. And that gave us a tremendous amount of confidence. You know, it was
Приятно, да. Вообще это, есть такая проблема, что изнутри, когда вы над продуктом работаете, будь то это фильм, будь то это игра, неважно, вы не понимаете, хорошо это или плохо. Вот вам и этот взгляд со стороны на то, что вы делаете, крайне важен. Крайне важен. Это единственная какая-то объективная оценка. Так, я до уборной кофейку себе еще плесну. Сейчас, 1 минуту. Снова с вами.
Outside validation of what we were trying to do, you know, that it was the right thing.
I think just with first-person shooters.
У кого какое было самое любимое оружие? Я не знаю. Мне кажется, мне бы всего больше с арбалета нравилось стрелять. На арбалет был моим любимым.
Already they were kind of like the vowels of weapons you put into first person. You got to have a shotgun, and there's obviously a pistol. You know, you need your weapon that's going to make you struggle and you drive you to get another weapon.
That was a lesson in how to make all of your weapons as orthogonal as possible, so each one did something completely.
И этот самый еще там же была такая пушка, которая пчелами стреляла. Ее показывали как раз арты. С ней она тоже меня как-то впечатляла. Револьвер или пылесос. Еще револьвер был, да.
Different. All the crazy weapons, those are my fault.
Вообще это вот интересно, то, что и были вот эти биологические какие-то оружия. Это, мне кажется, впервые было такое в каких-то играх.
So I did like the rocket launcher and the Gauss gun and the snarks.
Oh, I like snark.
Снарки всегда бесили, потому что они тебя жрут. Сложно было найти какую-то ситуацию, когда у них применение их оправдано.
Made me laugh. It's just always funny to watch people run away from the snarks.
The squeak grenade. It's called the snark, but I wanted something, little creature that you could bring up and hold, and you could throw it out, and it would just start running. Because people were camping, and everybody hated campers at that point. So you wanted the anti-camp weapon, but it was kind of, you could literally find a little hidey hole and just sit out there and just throw out 30 of them.
А вот в мультиплеере они работали хорошо.
All over the map. I had
Когда в компьютерных клубах играл, я помню, закидывал.
And you'd sit there, you do your finger blue, you do your finger towards him, and he'd get mad at you and he'd swat. So that was the inspiration for that particular animation. And then the other, that big alien creature with the, we needed some kind of alien weapon. Drew that one, built that one, animated that one, but that was also another one that whenever you could get in a corner and just shoot them in the air because the hornets would track. I think that was the biggest thrill, is brainstorming these with your crew, making them, building them, putting them in the game, and then playing with them, and then they're fun.
So there's sort of a trope of having a melee weapon. I think it was Steve Bond and Ken Birdwell and I were saying we wanted a device where the world was reacting to you. It really goes back to that theory of fun. But we were just running around like idiots, smacking the wall. It's an odd thing to know in retrospect, but at the time it felt profoundly satisfying to be able to smack walls. And that was just an example of how that fairly abstract notion of what fun was ended up translating into a set of decisions that were really visceral. When you're going around whacking a wall, a crowbar is an obvious thing to whack the wall with.
Ну, так это же стало частью серии, неотъемлемой по восприятию.
If the sound could let you know what's going to happen, that's really makes it powerful. So we're always on the lookout for that in level design, in monster design, communicating, because the AI is often hidden from the player. So we use the sound to broadcast the internal state of the AI. You know, soldiers, they tell you, I'm injured, I'm going to throw a grenade, I'm taking cover. You know, they are broadcasting as constantly as they can what's about to happen. So it was really important to try to keep those states distinct so that as you play the game, you're actually, whether you're aware of it or not, you're starting to be able to tell what's about to happen.
We knew he was a musician too, so he could do sounds, but you know, he also decided he was going to write the sound engine. And then he wrote the soundtrack. And he'd never written a soundtrack before, and he wrote the whole, you know, soundtrack for the game, and it won an award, and it was crazy.
There just weren't that many of us. You know, I had a little bit of a background playing music. I understood the sound engine really well, so it was really easy for me to just hook sounds in, and I understood enough about the level design side that I could kind of connect those things a little bit. Sounds could come from anywhere, and then I just heavily modified them. Usually those are animal sounds, reversing, changing.
Просто вот так вот все это слушая, у тебя в голове вообще собирается, как они мыслили, и что когда играешь, все это не осознаешь. То есть ты не деконструируешь игру, и вот сейчас, типа, слушая все это, ты, конечно, понимаешь, какая-то гигантская работа была проделана просто по анализу разных вещей, которые работают, не работают. И они, причем здесь рассказывают то, что те решения, которые они приняли в итоге, да, сколько они попробовали то, что не работает, сколько вещей неработающих они пытались строить.
Head crabs were rats. The little squeaky, yeah, that's a rat slowed way down and then reversed.
С учетом того, что там были реальные элементы отчаяния, когда Гейб сидел и рвал волосы и говорил, что мы как бы облажаемся.
Yeah, the DSP stuff was another cool thing that Kelly built. When you got an event, it sounded like you were an event, and that wasn't really happening, I guess, at least in Quake and other games I was playing back then.
You know, we had these huge silos, these cavernous spaces. The day they had their own echoey DSP, it made an enormous difference, right? You believed the space.
Kelly tells me, oh God, Chuck Jones asked him if the characters could speak and have their mouths move. And Kelly said,
это, наверное, еще первая игра, где была ротовая анимация.
No, that's super easy. You know, I could just
Trollface, здравствуйте.
Look at the audio and see if they're talking and do that. But like getting their mouth to move is stupid, he says to me. And I look, Chuck Jones told me the same thing. I told him making the mouths move was super trivially easy, but knowing when they're talking and knowing how to follow the envelope of the speech would be impossible. And Kelly and I just both looked at each other and like, oh. And so I went back to my office and he went back to his office. And I think within an hour, the characters were talking and their mouths were moving. And it was only because we sat there at lunch bitching about an animator who was 100% right.
Why are you leaving me here?
Scientist conversations, Kelly and I made that. When they're next to each other, one scientist will occasionally play a question and the other one will give him an answer. And it's not a script, you know, it might not always make sense.
I am rather looking forward to this analysis, aren't you? I don't think so.
But it had a bunch of personality. It was really cool. And I worked on getting those guys to look at you and turn their heads.
When we first added the ability for scientists to respond to the player and other things in the environment, I would call them response rules. The first time that went in, they came flying down the elevator, and one of them looks at you and goes, "Oh, hello, Gordon." And then they explode into a pile of jibs at the bottom.
Hello, the automatic diagnostic and announcement system welcomes you to the Black Mesa Research Facility. Remember, have a secure day.
Еще тоже там с тобой говорил, по сути, твой вот этот скафандр, типа, он же обозначал, что там такой-то уровень здоровья, какой-нибудь уровень радиации и прочее. Тоже так необычно.
hadn't really started working on the biggest part of the game, which I ended up shipping, which was surface tension. Prior to then, a lot of the work that I had done was the alien research labs, which turned into questionable ethics, and all of that was ditched. There were some concepts made it through, everything was rebuilt from zero. But you know what did make it through was Power Up. Yeah, basically that geometry survived completely intact. It was so closely designed for that creature that because the creature survived, the levels survived along with it. Yeah, there's this sort of central circular thing where you have to rotate the train, and you have to kill the Gargantua first because he was always defending the way out. And then you have to go to another area which looks very much like it was designed for Quake, because pretty much it was. There was a flooded pump room, and you have to drain the generator, and then you can switch the power on, and then you can take the train out. Yeah, I remember him being totally central to this whole thing. And then, well, how do we block the player? Which is, I mean, that's pretty much like design point number one for all level design. Okay, well, how do we prevent the player from just walking straight out through the exit? And you design backwards from there.
In the first year, we built a lot of world space, a lot of track as we call it, and the programmers would try to fit the AI into the existing maps. What we did the second year was we built the AI in very constrained environments that showcase the AI. Let's make the ideal space for the AI and then give that to the level designers to incorporate those elements into their map so that it worked better and was more interesting. And that Gargantua was an example of that. And the grunts especially. Yeah, we had the...
Ну, кстати, это интересная идея, что, типа, не надо универсально и писать, а можно просто написать отдельные для каждой environment.
AI that Steve had been working on, and he had designed all these interesting encounters with them just in his test map, and so he, you know...
То есть, кажется, что любой разработчик пытается что-то сделать универсальное, типа на все случаи жизни, но это тебе не нужно. Ну, это близко тогда к какому-нибудь скриптованности.
The player comes in low, and there's a marine on the same level, and then the next one they're up high, and then they come running down. Because it was really neat to see them retreat. They'd try to run back up the stairs and try to flank you from another side.
So Steve Bond, like I mentioned earlier, was this really young guy who had been making mods in Quake C, really the designer for so much of the AI. I mean, all the stuff.
Интересно, что получается Valve в какой-то мере сохранит вот это вот свой опыт работы с мододелами, потому что, по сути же, Counter-Strike — это мод Half-Life, и не возьмут его. И, по сути, доделают мод к Warcraft, Dota, и его тоже будут использовать. То есть, как будто бы весь бизнес стоит на мододелах.
That's good about the soldiers, the grunts you fight in Half-Life.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a language we could sort of use to say, you know, this is a place they can climb, this is a place they can jump to, this is a good place to hide. These are good places to go in general, or interesting places. So, you know, the AI had a little bit of help. We were trying to build something that utilized, you know, the train technology that Jay was working on. And we thought, well, let's give the player something that they can control, but in a limited way. We couldn't do vehicles like you see in Half-Life 2. So we did this, the most constrained vehicle we could think of, which was the train. Players didn't always bring the train with them. And so you had a bunch of these poor people walking down these tunnels.
Oh, is that why you electrified the
rail?
Yeah,
and the rails were, that was part of the feedback.
From that.
Part of the feedback was, well, you can just bypass all that, so we made the rails.
Я тоже почему-то не допирал. Помню, тоже на этих рельсах умирал, не понял, что нужно вагонетку.
Electric. It's like, well, maybe that'll teach them to bring the train with them. But the basic idea is, you know, let's explore that and then also reveal some of the hidden deep parts of the base, you know, the abandoned area.
Понятно, почему это не интуитивно понятно. То есть такого не было, у тебя не было опыта управления чем-то. Кажется, что все должно как бы само там ездить.
Areas where you might get a lot more of the Zen creatures. You know, we had designed some of the ones that didn't make it into the game to appear there. You know, bats that would dive bomb you, and while you're on the train, yeah, Stuka bats, and then We also tried hard to not make it feel like it was this super linear thing, so we tried to give little branches, and so there were some challenges there. Well, there's a really good sketch that Kelly Bailey made, which basically charted surface tension, and it was pretty extensive. Like, it went through the cliffside, and it went through areas where tanks were, and like a lot of soldier holdouts. Yeah, it even went through the desert with the cactuses and the helicopters, and then across a dam. It was pretty extensive. Yeah, when I saw that sketch, I was so motivated to just start building all of that stuff.
So I ran ahead with a lot of level design, a lot of geometry, and it seems like a lot of it stuck in some way or another, which is really amazing. I did the dam, which was funny. I just did that in a day. Right. Like, it was like about 4 or 5 hours. I did a Hoover Dam thing because I like the Hoover Dam.
I saw a concept of the cliffside. I think Harry Teasley built that render of the skybox. Yes. And I just thought, holy crap, this is perfect for vertigo. Like, whatever we do here, we have to play on vertigo and like narrow little edges and, you know, places you would like to normally dodge a grenade but you can't.
And that's the moment. That's really the big part of that level, is that reveal, and the play is kind of supports it afterward. Yeah. The helicopter comes in, you're fighting the helicopter, which is awesome.
First of all, I had a bunch of textures, and then every time I made new ones, whoever was working on the new levels would be like, "Oh, fresh textures! I'm going to use those." Somebody making another level would start using them, and I was like, "No, this is chaos. We need to restrict this." So I started naming the texture sets by the level that they were made for. I was trying to enforce some sort of like visual cohesion, and so that really.
У нее это получилось. То есть я бы сказал, что она игра довольно однородная визуально.
Ended up working.
There was one level I did. It was the introduction of the sort of the bounce pads, the alien bounce pads in the real world. And because, you know, story-wise, like, okay, you're getting closer to hitting the alien world. So I was, well, let's get a little bit of alien world infection into the real world. So I had done it just as a visual thing. John Guthrie made it 10 times better. And that's actually where he found the photo of my daughter, because I didn't put my daughter in Gordon's locker. I hid her in like this destroyed office someplace, you know, as a little Easter egg for myself. And John went and put my daughter's photo in Gordon's locker, which I think was a good decision.
Мило. Потом дочка скажет, я согласия не давал, и засудит отца.
Still get questions about stuff that I spent 5 minutes on 25 years ago from people who've now thought about this for 25 years, and they're thinking that there's 25 years worth of development went into this. I'm like, on some level, when you start talking about lore, I'm like, well, there's Black Mesa. That was just a matter, we needed a name for something that was evocative.
In that entrance, when you get off the train and there's that lobby where there's a big map on it, and when we were making that map, that was fairly early on, I put a dot in New Mexico. And then that turned into, I think Mark saw that, he was like, oh, where is that? This is where we are. And then he named it Black Mesa.
That is a favorite thing of mine, actually, if you come up with a name for something. And it evokes something, then you don't have to write the whole story. It's because it's a conspiracy plot. Everybody knows more about it than you do, so you don't have to answer those questions. You just keep raising questions and make the mystery kind of thing.
Like, dialogue came in later. Also, a lot of the scripted sequences.
Ну, в общем, как обычно, сценарий уже после писали, как и к Думу, на этом самом на коленке.
Came in later, and those helped to kind of sharpen the storytelling aspect of it, because, I mean, setting expectations to get up to the surface and then like, oh no, they're not here to help us.
The whole thing about diegetic writing, right? Like keeping the exposition in the game instead of outside the game. You know, I give a lot of credit to Mark.
After play tests, we'd realize that maybe you need more of a dialogue cue about something.
That's when we started to do like scientists who were literally pop up in a corner and go that way. There's a few of those that we stuck in right at the end when we'd like, well, we get one more session with Hal. He can say go down here, you know, go around that corner.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong.
I knew Hal from San Francisco as an artist, cartoonist. He was also an animator and an actor in some science fiction movies.
Классный у него этот самый галстучек.
So when we got down to the wire, we did a bunch of voice casting and nothing was right, and I just kept thinking of Hal. And I finally just called him and said, Hal, I want you to at least talk to people here so they can hear your voice. And I got him on a speakerphone, and I had a bunch of people gathered in my office. And I'm like, okay, Hal, everybody's here. And he's like, well, what would you like me to say? And everybody was like, this is him. This is the guy.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Another interesting voice thing was the G-Man. So we liked Mike Shapiro's work. So we knew we wanted to use him, but we brought him in to do Barney and also the G-Man. So we did a take on all the G-Man lines with kind of a straight voice, and it was thinking that, okay, we have something safe, but we're not super excited about it, and give us something else. And he does this crazy lizard voice.
The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks.
Короче, он попытался сделать рептилоида, и у него получилось. Просто ящеры против Гордона Фримана.
Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed.
And we took it back, and everybody just loved the crazy lizard voice, and so that's how it worked out.
Did you do the Nihilanth?
I did.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the Nihilanth. Just imagine his head floating in space as a baby.
I went into Gabe's office and I demanded Gabe to either fire Ken or I quit. And Gabe just laughed at me.
Correct response from Gabe.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
Until Bill got there, I was the oldest guy there.
Обычная в таких компаниях обстановка токсичная.
It was hard because, you know, I had to go home in the evenings, whereas the young guys who just moved out from Florida or wherever, they did not have to go home in the evenings. I'd go home, see my kids. When they were in bed, I would come back down the hill to Valve. Nobody else I worked with had to get up to get their kids off to school in the morning, but I did.
You're wired to just take full advantage of the situation. You put everything into it. So when we say
По-другому, видимо, продукты не делаются.
We worked 18-hour days. That's no exaggeration.
Yeah.
Not at all. I can edit all day. I can design all day. I don't have to worry about anything. You know, two guys from Microsoft start a game studio with a bunch of incredibly capable, you know, with an incredible team. You're gonna push yourself harder than ever before.
I don't usually.
На этом капитализм и держится, на таких вот людях. Типа два каких-то парня крутых, что-то сделали. Я не буду, у меня не будет личной жизни, буду просто ебашить.
Punch real hard. I get it done in. Like I come in, I work, I go home, and a lot of people were living really long hours. You know, the classic. Well, I'll come in at 1 and then goof around for a while and then work late into the late at night. I was employee 17. There was a woman that was the kind of the office manager, and eventually Mona Lisa Guthrie came in at the desk. I was the only woman on the team. That was not awesome.
I decided to become a baseball fan.
Вот про ебы историю я послушал бы. Интересно.
Year after the birth of my first daughter. So she's the one in Gordon's locker, Isabel, but she's very special needs. She's 25 today. Cognitively she's about 3 years old. So after her birth, in the middle of Half-Life production, it was
Типа у нее что-то с развитием.
Really hard. It was really hard because we were getting about 2 hours of sleep at a stretch because she had to be fed through a tube in her stomach every 2 hours. I had just a difficult time relating to the world when she was a baby. I had a hard time just talking to people because I was just kind of tired and angry all the time. Yeah, my wife, she worked at Valve for a while. She did a bunch of textures for the game. Like I say, she did those soda machines. She did just a bunch of levels.
Короче, познакомились. Служебный роман.
Textures. She textured Big Mama, the sort of boss creature. She textured him. But when Isabel arrived, she obviously had a lot of issues. So Yachts had to stop working and stay with her at home. And it was the last year of Half-Life, and we pretty much crunched that whole year. So I was at work a lot. It was hard. It was definitely a hard year.
Games have often had this thing where they're just a little too attached to Star Wars, Blade Runner, Aliens. So it wasn't that hard to try to get people to go, let's think of something really alien. Like what Zen was initially.
Ну да, это тоже вот это хорошая идея, что реально создать что-то необычное. И это плюс Half-Life. Именно его арты, они... И то, как этот мир выглядит, он необычный. Ну, как Morrowind. Что мне нравится Morrowind.
You're gonna go inside a huge...
Какие-то грибы, нестандартная фэнтези.
Alien organism and kill it or figure out how to turn it on or off or something like that. I didn't know we couldn't actually do that or what was involved.
What does it mean to have alien architecture or a planet that's biologically defining the structures in it, as opposed to what the tools were good at, which is making rectangles?
And then slowly it scaled back till it was more and more corridors, and that everybody was really good at.
People were finishing up stuff, and I was still working on Zen, because it was like it went through a lot of iteration, or at least we're trying to figure out what it was. Different people were taking swings at it, either in static concepts.
Weren't you under a bit of a timeline crunch for it as well?
Yeah, it was the end of the game.
Yeah.
I wanted to cut stuff out, and they're like, no, leave it in. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have any, I don't have any support for this.
Right.
And then after a lot of it was built, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the gravity and give you a jump pack. That came later. And I was like,
There's a lot of stuff, especially in Zen.
Вы смотрели «Царство падальщиков»? Нет, вообще не видел, даже не слушал этого фильма.
You're getting close to a first draft of some things, right? Because we just didn't have time, and we got to the end of the game, and so we considered not going to Zen, but the art concepts people did were so cool.
For the Zen textures, I was deeply inspired by electron microscope imagery, and we had so much of that regular structure.
Ну, наверное, поэтому все это похоже на какой-то организм, то есть кого-то вот где-то внутри такой чужеродный элемент.
Texture material that I wanted to do something more organic. Insects as well. I think there's a lot of textures that were based on beetles. That was really fun and incredibly challenging levels to make because that editor was not friendly for organic shapes.
На чем-то похоже на эту самую из «Игры престолов» на женщину-рыцаря такую массивную, что-то она визуально мне напоминает.
The tree that hits you if you get too close, and the light stalk that kind of hides. But Ken did a bunch of AIs there. The floating controller guys.
And the flying guys were great, but you had to set up air nodes for them to travel properly. I prototyped a lot, and some of those prototypes were used.
Ну, кстати, вот это, мне кажется, уже слишком. Еще вот эти монстры какие-то думоподобные.
The final battle, I believe, and also for the Gonard, which I think Randy did.
We, at some point, have to stop polishing. At some point, we have to, it is what it is. And if the player hasn't had fun up until that point, well, then we failed. They're not going to get to that point, so who cares? It just has to finish, and it did.
Yeah, and there's always Half-Life 2 to win them back. I love that sensation of being alone in an alien dimension, but the experience that people really liked in the game was scientists pop up and Barney pops up and you have companions and you have this feeling of companionship around you with all the other stuff that's going on. So a lot of people miss that, which I understood, and I think if we'd had thought about the ending from the beginning, we would have figured out some ways to do that a little more.
Мы создавали локацию, похожую на Мексику, чтобы уехать отдыхать в Мексику.
I remember coming back from downtown Cabo very drunk and then running to the beach, but didn't know there was like a 6-foot retaining wall there, so I just went right over. And then I was hurting so much I slept the night where I fell. Yeah, I woke up the next morning.
I had never heard that
a really
story.
Stiff neck.
Oh my God. It's a good thing you were pretty young.
Блин, было мерзко.
I remember after
просыпаться после такого.
we'd gone final on the game. I was home one morning, taking a shower, and my wife asked me, like, it's done. Is it any good? Is the game any fun? Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so.
I don't think it's exaggerating by saying if any one of the crew had disappeared for a month, we wouldn't have shipped. It didn't matter who they were. Everybody was mission critical.
My inspiration from Valve, what I really took away with me was that the thing that is most important to me is what are we making? Coming in as a texture artist, you don't have a lot of expectation that you're going to get to influence that. And I was able to have quite a bit of influence on the what.
It was so fun to work with the people who were making Half-Life. The collection of people were diverse, at least like in their professional backgrounds, was kind of all over the place. And so figuring out how to work.
Здесь, конечно, как в САУ, у них все это менеджеры на самом деле, как они там распределяли задачи, какие у них было именно, там были какие-то совещания, как часто.
With all those people.
Были скрам.
But also just the fact that we had hired really stellar people who were good at collaborating, like they're conscientious people, deeply passionate about what they wanted to create. That just was a recipe for a professionally, like, really good time.
It seems to me that one of the things that good games do is make 2 games worth of stuff and then throw away the bad game. And fortunately, like, Valve was able to do that. A lot of companies couldn't do that, but backstopped by Gabe and Mike.
Какая-то вера, да. Ну, что, конечно, понимаешь, что в итоге все делалось вопреки. Типа все крутые вещи делаются вопреки.
Valve could afford to do that.
И на самом деле не так, как надо делать.
Absolutely nothing interesting to say when people say, would you reflect on your legacy? Like, I really don't look back a whole lot. I'm always excited by the future, right? So to me, it's like I can look back at the things we did, but to me, they're just sort of like the stepping stones to what we're going to be able to do in the future. That's just how I'm wired, right?
Ну, кстати, вот по интервью Гейб ощущается очень волевым человеком. У него такой прям голос вот командой. То есть он прям может давить. Мне, кстати, нравился мультиплеер. Время в него играл. Counter-Strike не нравился. Да, классный документальный фильм. Немного грустный. Спасибо огромное, Абдулюк, за 3000 рублей за донат, за поддержку. Так, я предлагаю вернуться к Лебедеву. Смотрев на Ивана. Да, захотелось переиграть. Рок ее нету на какой-нибудь свече, потому что на свече было в нее поиграть удобнее.